Hello and welcome. This is Cashflow 2.0, the only podcast that walks you through the treacherous jungles of your financial statements and leads you on a path to not only overcoming some of the most costly mistakes that many new entrepreneurs make, but helps you make your money start working for you right now.
Sweet.
Join us today as Pam changes your financial future and makes finance fun.
Hello and welcome back to the Cashflow podcast. This is Pam Pryor, CFO to 6- and 7-figure entrepreneurs looking to up-level their game. And we're going to continue on in this episode in a conversation we started last episode about what kind of finance help people need in their businesses. And one of the questions I continuously get, and the chapter in my book that seems to get the absolute most attention and I get the most feedback from, is the chapter that's titled Build Your Team, Finance and Accounting Roles, and then the second part to that, which is called Pick Your CFO, because there are a number of different choices you have. So in the last episode, we talked about working our way up from tax accountant to bookkeeper to internal accountant to controller and then to CFO. And there's sort of a thermometer that guides when it's time to make the switch from one to the other. And in some cases, you may totally switch them out one for another. In some cases, if your business is growing exponentially, you might actually keep the previous role in place and add a layer. It can vary depending on where you are in your business growth or life cycle. So I want to focus a little bit of time because this is where, frankly, I get the most questions. I have a lot of 7-figure clients that are dealing with this question, and it's one that's good for 6-figure folks to understand as they're starting towards maybe making that transition over the 7-figure border, assuming that, the complexity and size of their business is growing as quickly as their revenue is. So there are a number of different types of CFO that you can hire, believe it or not. CFO stands for Chief Financial Officer. I sometimes say that it stands for Cash Flow Officer, but we'll stick with the by-the-book definition of Chief Financial Officer. So it's the lead finance position in your company. And in the case of 7-figure entrepreneurs, which is where this really starts to apply, is in the 7-figure range that you might need a CFO. There are some exceptions where you could need one at a lower revenue level, but you don't generally hit this kind of complexity until it gets to the higher level. In that business, you need more than just a head finance role. If you're a single owner of a 7 or 8-figure business, you need a lead finance role that is also your friend in the foxhole. And I use that term a lot because it's a term that my one-on-one clients have used with me forever. And it's somebody that you can trust with the kinds of questions and decisions and venting sessions that you're going to need to have occasionally, that will hold your confidence, number one, and won't kind of send the organization off scattering in 20 different directions. They know how to filter you and your emotions and your strategic mindset into exactly the right things that need to be done from a financial standpoint. So it's somebody who speaks your language, supports you, and has your trust. That is absolutely essential. If you have a CFO that you don't trust, or if you're thinking of hiring somebody and you're going to immediately have that trust, you need to step back and recognize that this is a role you need to think very carefully about. You want to know and trust this person because they're going to know everything. As I mentioned in the last episode, what a CFO will do for 7, 8-figure business owners is start to help them bridge the gap between business and personal finances. Because as a business owner, you are in this for any number of reasons. And some of them, in some cases, this is one of many businesses that you have. In other cases, this business is your life's passion and you want to do it forever and turn it over to your children. In other cases, you are creating a business so that you can make an exit at some point and make a significant amount of money on the value you've built. In other cases, you're building something you want to turn over to your kids. But in each and every one of those cases, there's a specific personal financial goal or series of goals that need to be addressed and managed and cared for. And you need somebody in your foxhole with you that understands that in the context of the decisions you're making for your business. Because an employee might not necessarily see or understand that. They're focused on the business. You want them focused on the business. That's their job. Their job's not to make sure that this all integrates into a wealth portfolio for you. But in truth, that's exactly what this is doing. So once your business starts to succeed, make some profits, and build some wealth, is another trigger point for you that you need to have a CFO there. But if you're also starting to feel a little lonely at the top and like you have nobody in the organization that you can talk about these decisions with, that's another signal that you need a lead finance role. And I should mention that sometimes the CFO is called a lead finance person. Sometimes they're called a vice president of finance. Sometimes a finance director. Comes by all sorts of titles. But to me, it means your finance friend in the foxhole, who is, no matter what you call them, helping you manage your wealth and cash flow. So there are multiple types of CFOs. And the three that I really want to focus on today are full-time, part-time, and interim CFOs. And they're all very different, and they each have their own set of pros and cons. So let's talk first of all about the full-time CFO. So there's a little bit of a dilemma because a full-time CFO comes with a full-time salary. And just like for any role, the compensation around this role and the expectations for it are going to vary according to the experience level of the candidate. In my book, I go into some of the different price levels that based on experience and based on the size of your company. It's very much broad stroke boundaries, but it'll give you at least a sense of what you might be talking about. But, the range, quite honestly, can range from, as low as $100,000 and up to, 8-figure salaries. So the range is huge, but I break it into some bite-sized chunks for 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs. But what is clear is that it's an expensive choice for a business, no matter when the business makes it. So it's really important to check out what you expect to gain from it and make sure that the gains your business is going to get from having this person in place is going to be greater than the overall cost. Now, that might not be immediate dollar for dollar trade. Like a CFO can come in the door at $100,000 salary and you expect him or her to make that salary back in the next 15 minutes. It's just not going to happen that way. But understanding that the overall value to your organization is increasing by more than what you're paying that particular full-time CFO. So you really want to assess what value you expect to get from the CFO before you hire a full-time CFO. The benefits of a full-time CFO, it's in the title, right? They're yours. They're focused on you and your business full-time, no distractions on the business side of things. Hopefully they have a personal life. But they're focused entirely on you and your business, and that is what you're paying for, quite frankly. And they're bringing to the table an experience, hopefully, and probably some personality traits and some balancing characteristics to you as a key member on your executive leadership team and as your friend in the foxhole. You get the benefit of all that wrapped up in one nice, neat package. The downside, the only downside, frankly, is the cost. Unless you consider recruiting a downside, because recruiting is really hard for this role. And I highly recommend referral for this type of a hire, somebody that you know who knows somebody directly, as opposed to third, fourth, or fifth degree of separation, because it's such a key role. And take the time in advance before hiring to make sure you really do gel with whoever this is. So that's the full-time role. Then we want to talk about interim and part-time, and these are often confused, so I will talk about them separately. And the costs for these two vary as much as the number of candidates you're going to talk to. and your own sort of internal situation. In the book, I do have a way to do some math around it if you're looking for an hourly type arrangement or situation, but there are very different models today for today's entrepreneurs, which are a ton more valuable to you than the traditional part-time, I'm going to pay you by the hour type CFO outsourced services, I'd call them. So I'll talk to you about the tradition when we get to part-time CFO. I'll talk to you about both the traditional type model and a newer model that's coming into being now across some of the newer style of entrepreneurs. So let's talk about this interim CFO first. An interim CFO is really somebody you're bringing on to bridge some transitional period. Like they're not intended to be part-time in your organization forever. They're coming in and they might be actually in your office full-time, but it's for some determined preset period of time. So they may be working, 40, 50 hours a week for you, but it's for a 2-month period. And a typical situation for something like this might be turnover, like your existing controller or CFO has retired, so you need somebody to bridge the gap for a few weeks, months, whatever that might be. Another situation where you might bring in an interim CFO is maybe you don't need a full-time CFO, but you're making that transition from being on one particular system, maybe you're on QuickBooks or Xero, but you've recognized that due to the complexity of your business, you need to migrate to a slightly more robust accounting system. You might bring in an interim CFO to help make sure that that particular transaction is played out properly, because there are a lot of steps involved in doing that the right way and not just wasting money on a new piece of software. And an interim CFO could come in and take the lead on that sort of a mission and make sure that it happens. And they're only there for as long as it takes to do the transition. So that's a couple of examples of why you might get an interim CFO. The goods of that, right, is they're in, they handle the project, and they're out. So the cost is contained, and you can set some very clear performance objectives and that kind of thing. But you also want to make sure, because they're going to be in there probably full-time for some, predetermined duration, is you really want to make sure they're a cultural fit, especially if you have some accounting folks already in place. You need to make sure that that interim person comes in a way that's not disruptive to the culture and developmental opportunities and all the other sort of things that go along with personnel in an organization. In fact, in a perfect world, you want your interim CFO to have a side job of actually mentoring up the other folks in your organization to the next level. So spend some time. Don't just get an off-the-shelf CFO consultant to come in for these things. Spend time with them. You're going to be paying good money. You want to make sure that they very nicely integrate with your organization and that they very clearly understand what you expect of them in terms of their ability to gel with and use the momentum of the organization, rather than coming in like a brick wall and laying down the law because of their expertise or whatever it might be. Now, there are times and situations where laying down the law on a brick wall is exactly what you need. So I am not talking about every case here. I'm talking about most cases when you need an interim CFO. It's best to have one that doesn't totally disrupt things, unless disruption is your aim, which sometimes happens. So let's move on to a part-time CFO. Part-time CFO is somebody you bring on for the long run, but only for a limited number of hours or per week or per month. So for example, I do part-time CFO work and I only take on 4 clients. And the reason I only have 4 clients at a time is because the way I do this model is that for each of those 4 clients, in their minds, they have a full-time CFO. So I'm accessible to them. I am their go-to friend in the foxhole. I am leading their finance organization, whether that just be another bookkeeper or, an entire staff. But I'm not actually full-time for them. They know that I have 3 other clients and a business and all of these other things, but they also know that when it comes to their business, I am a tank. No information ever leaves my side, leaves my mouth that's not related, that's not supposed to. So it's all kept confidential. But they also know that they can share things with me that they couldn't necessarily share with the rest of their full-time employee base. So that is one model. It's a retainer model where you pay a proportional amount of what a full-time CFO would cost, but you really kind of have access to them whenever you need them, but there's a little more flexibility than you'd expect. If you get this sort of a person, be absolutely sure this is somebody that's going to climb in there with you and get to know and understand your business. Remember, with a CFO, they're not just there to crank out accounting work. They're there to add value to your organization. Anything that you're paying, they should be adding back in the overall value for the organization, whether it's cash back right away because they're managing, they're acting as a controller as well, or whether it's increasing the long-term value of your organization. You want to make sure you're getting value back from that role. The second model, which is the more typical model, and there are tons of companies who do this, is they outsource CFOs. And they basically have a rack of CFOs that they can pull off the shelf, and they say, here's your part-time CFO. He or she will work for you X number of hours a month or a week, and we charge X per hour. Or you might have a hang a shingle kind of CFO who does this themselves, so their job is to go out and do part-time CFO work, and they take on a certain number of clients. If, they tell them you get 10 hours a week or you get 30 hours a month or whatever it is, and that's the number of hours that the person gets, and they get paid by the hour. And there are a couple different ways to calculate what that sort of a payment might be. The factors that come into play, because again, it's hard to pin down what the cost would be because it's based on their experience. It's based on what your business needs are. It's based on a number of things. The kinds of things I would consider in putting this person in place are, there are like 3 major points that I would consider in coming up with my price that I'd be willing to pay. One is, are they going to be a W-2 employee of your company, or are they going to be a consultant? And the only reason that's important is that you remember that if they are going to be a consultant, then they're going to have to be paying their own self-employment tax. You're going to be relieved of a portion of the tax that needs to be paid for them. Now, I'm not going to go down the legal road of whether a CFO should be a W-2 employee or a 1099 contract employee. There is a host of opinions out there on where to draw that line and how to draw that line. And quite honestly, that can vary from state to state. So this is absolutely not a legal recommendation that I'm making either way. I'm just telling you that when you consider whether you're going to pay them as a W-2 employee or a 1099 contractor, you're probably going to have to pay a little bit more if they're going to be a contractor. Okay, second thing that's important to know, and this is not quite as intuitive, is how long is the engagement for? And the reason this is important is because if the CFO that you're hiring knows that they can rely on this contract with you for a longer period of time, they're likely or should be asked to give you a price break. So if somebody knows that you're going to put them in place for a year and you're going to be paying them for a year, you might be able to pay a little less than if you tell them, hey, I'm going to decide month to month whether I want to keep you or not. Or I can't tell you how long this engagement could be. It might be 3 months. It might be 2 years. The way you structure that contract with them will affect that price. Most outsourced CFOs are likely to give a price break if the duration of the contract is going to be a little bit longer. And the next, and then the most subjective, is, are they in high demand, right? The higher the quality of their proven work, the more in demand they're going to be. And it is a supply and demand market. That's all there is to it. Businesses today have a couple of choices around recruiting, and you need to decide what type of financial help you are ready for and need inside your organization. But that said, if you're going to get one of these higher demand CFOs with a lot more experience, then you also have every right to expect additional value out of them. So don't pay just for the title. Make sure that this person is bringing to the table value that's going to absolutely equate to the premium that you pay for it. And again, I've got some, calculations for hourly rates inside the book, but the bottom line is that it should pay for itself in value. Again, don't talk to a CFO and say, if I'm paying you $250,000 a year, I'm going to get $250,000 back in savings, right? That's not the right answer, but they should be increasing the value of your business to you by at least as much as you're paying them pretty darn quickly, especially if you're paying a premium. CFO that you're going to pay a premium for should get up that learning ramp so that it's almost like climbing up a learning cliff. You shouldn't have to wait for too long of a learning ramp there. So that is a few tips around how and when to hire a CFO. There's a little bit more information in the book, Your First CFO, which the Accounting Cure for Small Business Owners, which is available in bookstores and on Amazon. I hope that you have found value in this and that you keep listening to our podcast. Subscribe to it if you would here on iTunes. And if this is useful to you, I would love it if you'd leave a recommendation. That would mean the world to me. If you left a rating and told me what was valuable and what other information you'd like to hear about. So I wish you a great rest of the day and hope that you find this useful when it's time to hire your first CFO. Take care.